I felt spiritually called to do this podcast. And this podcast is part of a search for identity that's been going on for me the last several years. The way I got started doing that was through dealing with childhood trauma and thinking about who I would have been if that never happened to me. And as you know, when things happen to you in your life, they've already happened, and there really is no way to tell who you would have been if they never happened to you. It's just not plausible. So going forward, I had to decide, who am I going to be? Who have I been? What do I want in my life, and what's my purpose? And inevitably, in spiritual tradition, you learn that there are reasons that things happen to you. And I prefer to take that approach because what's the alternative? For you to say, I've lived my life this whole time for no reason? Well, some people think that. It really depends on what tradition you work in. And for me, spirituality is a big umbrella. Spirituality could be like it was for my grandmother, listening to sermons from the 70s from Anabaptist preachers, not going to church because no church was good enough for her, getting up every morning and using her one good eye to read her Bible while she was doing stretches that many would recognize to be yoga. Maybe spirituality for you is similar to what it's been like for me, which has been a lifetime search through all religions to figure out that there's a divine spark in all of us. Having a book on your nightstand that you read every night that brings you comfort. I have the Book of Tao, and that helps me get through my life when things seem hard. But I know that a big part of spirituality is also getting to know other people and letting other people get to know us. And you might have found this out if you were brought up in a variety of faiths, but Catholic comes to mind. There's a part in the Catholic service where Catholics take the time to say, "Peace be with you," and also with you. If you're Catholic, you obviously remember this. And that strikes me as interesting because if you know Catholic services, they like to get in and out in 45 minutes. But they still have time to look at each other and say, "Peace be with you," and also with you. That's something that I really loved about the Catholic faith. Whatever you want to say about Catholics. And I'm sure we can approach every religion with that type of skepticism, but also the idea that there's a divine spark in all of us and a divine spark in all religions. So, how do we approach ourselves in relation to what we're supposed to do in the world, who we're supposed to be? And what I'm coming to is that we do have to surrender to the fact that there's a universe in control. And there's a universe of goodness. And part of that goodness is helping people when they feel like they can't help themselves. And I'm not talking about an imperialist type of helping people. I'm not talking about a human rights imperialism. I'm talking about something as simple as getting to know the people around you. Not many people that I know in a passing basis, for instance, would know that I've been through childhood trauma. Now, am I going to tell some stranger that I've known for 15 minutes what my life has been like for the last 30 years. Well, I guess it depends on the context. Here I am doing this podcast where I'm being pretty vulnerable. But you know what I mean. How often are you really getting to know people nowadays? In a world where we curate our appearance for people, and what we see is based on this hyperreal set of images, how much do you really get to know somebody that you interact with? I think part of the emptiness that we sometimes feel nowadays is because we don't get to know each other, and we feel like no one knows us. We feel temporarily validated because somebody gives us a thumbs up. And sometimes that means that they're just like for likers. You like what I like, you like what I do, and I like what you do. So how do we really get to know who we are? And how do we know who other people are? Not just what they curate, but it can make you feel good to get to know other people. This is why Catholics take that little time to say peace be with you and also with you. So when we talk about self-determination, I think we need to structure our conversation around the planet of self-determination in our universe. And that would be Mars. Here's an introduction to the spirituality of these podcasts. They're a mix of spiritual materialism, working also inevitably with the traditions of religions and indigenous practices from around the world. In astrology, I work with the Western zodiac system, but those with an interest in popular incarnations of yoga, tantra, mantra, as well as astrology should know that they originated as part of the oldest religion in the world, now Hinduism, once the Vedic religion, called instead Dharma, a collection of laws for right living. Despite the ways we enclose ourselves sometimes, we live in relation to everything around us. This means universal elements of space exist within us. Archetypes we've always used are unavoidable as they can teach us patterns and stories from our ancestors. Many of us wonder what lies beyond the polarities that can often occur in this life. A connection with a spiritual life which recognizes the dignity of each individual is tantamount to soul-level fulfillment. When we step away from the separateness and recognize that all of us contain all signs and energies, we can receive a level of peace. As they would say in the Christian tradition, a peace of God which surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds. And as we'll discuss, this is not a spirituality that exists outside of humanity's limitations. When we deny parts of ourselves, that's a sure way to let those things take over our lives. Just as when someone wrongs us and they become the focus of all of our energy. Gustavo Gutierrez identifies the makings of a spiritual tradition. 1. A powerful experience that gives insight into the life of spirit. 2. Reflection on that experience through writing, composition, prayers, liturgy, art, as well as preaching and teaching. 3. The entrance of those reflections into the larger tradition to be studied, built upon, and drawn from. Many of us want to show up in the world for causes we know need tending. Issues of power come to mind, repression of the true identity. We want to show up for life and have an understanding of how to assert and how and when to pull back and heal. When I was a young girl, my grandmother was a Bible school teacher. In her house, she had a chart on the wall. The wall was the path of salvation. Well, not the wall, but the image on the wall. And on the path to salvation, there were roots that we could settle in. One of them was religion, another one was education, another one was works, another relationships. But at the end of the day, the way to exit the maze was a path that said, I am the way, the truth, and the light. And that path would be considered God. But I believe that we have God inside of us, and that's the point. Our job is to make it through hell, the lessons that we learn in this life, and choose God instead, which is the divine spark in each one of us. So how do we find the God inside of us? I believe this depends on your individual consciousness. Feminist ethics of therapy teaches us to understand our lives. We have political implications. The personal is political. We have to go out and seek ways to rectify socio-political injustices to make things better for new generations of women. This would go for any marginal position. We arrive here to this human experience to live out our energies that we've been given. Spirituality, I believe, can help us recognize our mission here, and it can help us feel at home in the world for this incarnation. The truth is, despite all these religious practices, there are no rules for living. That becomes evident when I look at the lives of people who have gained success. Sometimes they go about humane ways of gaining a secure position in this life, and sometimes they don't. And that doesn't make what these people do okay if they go about things, with nefarious methods. But it does show us a good life is not necessarily qualified by becoming wealthy. But since we're on the topic of worldly power and being in the world, let's start with the energy of Mars. How do you behave in conflict? What's your leadership and follower style? Self-development all depends on what sign our Mars falls under and in what house. As someone who has Mars in the home sign of Aries, my reactions are quick and impactful. Honestly, I would say that I scare people sometimes with my approach, but I'm really just trying to get a point across. It's the energy of Mars that makes it seem like it's aggressive. So unlike Scorpio, I eventually let things go and rarely hold a grudge. Sometimes conflicts bring me closer to the people I love, and I appreciate that. There are mixed interpretations of the astrology of the chakras, but to me, the root chakra resonates closely with Aries and Scorpio. Each concerns the intimacy of inhabiting a body. Scorpio with power struggles, Aries as the warrior. So getting into a conflict and being able to resolve it is one of the most intimate activities you can have with someone other than, sex. Speaking of physical union, your Mars sign more than your Venus sign determines how you express not only your will, but your sexuality. The ruler and aspects to your Mars can tell you how you feel about sex. Speaking of conflict, here's the silent partner with Hard to Live With. The worldly over the spiritual can describe Mars. How do you feel in your body? Do you exercise? What types of exercise make you feel at home in your body? How does it feel when you walk down the street? Do you feel determined? No sign exists in a vacuum, so for people who think they can live in the mind alone, they're mistaken. We all incarnate with a body. Fire, passion. If we don't have these, life can seem meaningless. No matter what kind of body you have that you've incarnated in, it's for a reason. Whether your body is considered abled, that's the body that you exist in now. How can you best feel at home in that body? And that's what the energy of Mars asks us to understand within ourselves. Why do we become angry? Because of the challenging boundaries of the self. That's mine. Don't touch that. Boundaries are good. Boundaries can protect you and show you who you are. Mars is also where we can learn to say goodbye to the genders of male and female. We vaguely refer to energies as masculine or feminine historically, and that's what I'll do here to lead into saying your Mars shows you one element of how you present to the world. My Mars being in Aries, as I mentioned prior to this, some would say I'm masculine in my approaches to things. Primarily a Western construct, man and woman as we know them, limits people from being their true selves, and is only because souls incarnating now will not put up with that shit are we seeing activist organizations surrounding this issue. Gender rules, as if there are any. If you want to read further on this, I would suggest reading The Invention of Women, Making an African Sense of Western Gender Discourses. A spectacular book. There is a denial of identity to people who do not fit this male or female from the documents they must procure, the way they must perform, the way they're ignored by people who don't know how to deal with genderqueer, non-binary, and trans people. Mars shows us how we assert our identity, in which fashion: hard, soft, medium, neutral, balanced, reckless, immediately, later. Because of what we've been taught, someone gendered female being assertive can be read as angry. We sense that this has been identified as a female problem instead of someone just asserting themselves, and now activists are calling it out. Now, within this podcast, you have to know that this is a queer spirituality for all people, all signs, loving under all. In medical astrology, Aries rules the muscles, head, adrenal glands, sense of smell, and taste. How do you respond when someone offends these senses? How do you respond when someone offends parts of your body? When someone invades your space? At a concert earlier this year, I found myself responding to a drunk man invading my space by blacking out and pushing him until he fell down, saying, "Don't you fucking touch me." Rage blackouts are real, people. When I went to the root of that reaction, I found childhood sexual trauma and the feeling of needing to defend my space. I felt like he needed to stay out of my space because it was a violation. This was a moment I could vindicate myself, but also protect the woman standing in front of me from harassment. This bordered from just dancing to crossing the line. This was based on envy of my position, in this case at the concert, my staked claim. He was asking himself, obviously, why wasn't he entitled to my space? And this triggered his action. It's entitlement that produces violent encounters. This level of violence and reaction to the violence depends on the encroachment. And what I've found over the years is when someone attempts to malefically or malevolently invade your space, usually emotionally or symbolically, you can allow them even when you know it's wrong, or you can stand your ground. And I've found if you allow people to invade, you will be the one carrying the weight, not them. So what will you do? This is Azar Swan, Dance Before the War.
You were picking violets from the garden. You weren't feeling right. Well, you left your heart in a field and hid on somewhere. Did you see his face? Did he look at you? See the light from his eyes? Just think, did you swim? Can you forget? Sympathy for the murder, eyes shooting up like a dead sky. This song dance before the war. Sympathy for the murder, eyes shooting up his own head. This song dance before the war. This song dance before the war. This song dance before the war. Air moving in and out of my lungs, my arms and legs are going numb. What's inside? Everything was red. Down by the pounds of guns and ammunition. Side of face first, blood in my mouth, the air is thin and burning my throat. The red dot pointed at his chest. You can never give a man time to prove he's not the best. Sympathy for the murder, eyes shooting up like a dead sky. This song dance before the war. Sympathy for the murder, eyes raising up his own head. This song dance before the war.
How do you heal from an offense to your body? Have you tried just not living in the material world to cope? Perhaps you're of the belief that we're cyborgs and that our bodies are now so connected to electronics we've become more of a post-human assemblage. The work we used to do primarily through bodily signals of psychic transmission, we now do through phones, instant messaging. Have you ever thought of someone only to get a text from them, see them drive past on the street, or get an email from them? What even are the benefits of living in the material world now that we don't have to? Well, such is the human experience. We come here materially. In thinking about Mars archetypes, we should think about the tarot. For instance, the Tower tarot card. You've seen it. The Tower. There's a lightning bolt, widely recognized to be a Hebrew yod. For those of you who don't know what a yod is, the meaning of yod can mean a small amount, to make a short note of, and it's found in the translations through, according to, near, of, immediately, next to, place, power, and strength. I would say the Hebrew yod could be associated with the action of Mars. In the Tower Tarot, we see people falling far from the top of the tower leading to the heavens, like the Tower of Bible mythology, the Tower of Babel. They're falling to earth, and when they fall to earth, they'll have to deal with the realities of being on the ground and being separated from the ultimate spirit, having to be an individual self, recognizing that when we're human, we don't actually reach a heaven here on earth. Like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, this is a hell where we go through trials and tribulations. It doesn't always feel like hell, but we go through a lot of tests here. This is soft and furious, entering the center of the self. in the world represents Aries. What do I mean by that? Well, consider the countries that are ruled by Aries via their birth date. Palestine, a place of contestation and conflict with Zionists, and a place people from around the world seem to have an emotional opinion about. Israel is also ruled by Aries, a place which is said to be the position of self-determination by the Jews, but where we also see how self-determination does not occur in a vacuum, and actually, your self-determination can encroach on someone else's rights. England, a place which became an imperialist model for other nations, asserting itself and commandeering the selves of other countries and humans in the case of the transatlantic slave trade and overall colonialism, definitely a Mars-ruled place. Germany is a place of many innovations, but many think of the self-determination narratives of the Nazi movement and how nationalist individuation can actually be toxic when we think we're too special to treat people with dignity. Police shot approximately 600 Jews, half of them children, in the Polish Jewish ghetto of Krakow, also ruled by Aries, both the city and the country, Poland. Sierra Leone, though it has many other qualities, is known for the blood diamond trade and as the departure point for the transatlantic slave trade. Thinking of the tarot again, the Emperor Tarot is also represented by Mars. So how can we embody the good qualities of this energy by creating a safe foundation for ourselves without dominating or brutalizing all the people in our path in order to get there? How can we be leaders with wisdom and boundaries while recognizing there are people all around the world helping us do the work? In every tradition of astrology since its inception, Mars has been represented by the color red. Some of the other planets share this color, but none share it across the board in every tradition. The challenge is how to self-actualize without denying the existence of people other than yourself. How do you recognize your part without taking credit for the whole thing? In Feng Shui, red is the color of intensity. In advertising, red is the color to induce feelings of hunger. So nothing that makes you feel as though you've incarnated more than the basic need to eat. Eating gives us energy to proceed. Mars energy, particularly under Aries direction, puts us in a state of heat and excitation. Consider ginger's spice and warming qualities. This can remind us of Aries. Astrological imbalances with Aries energy can result in blockages manifesting as excess inflammation of the body parts that Aries rules. So we know that too much anger impacts the organs negatively, and if you didn't, now you do. Bravery is good, but not steamrolling others in self-interest. Are you too hot and need to cool? I know that I'm attracted to hot foods ever since my progressed sun and rising sign went into Aries years back. But everyone needs to cool down too. We can't be hot all the time or we'll burn out. Don't mind my puns. How do you take action, listeners? Do you hope someone else will do things for you? Maybe not someone, but do you hope that changes will come without your direct participation in life? Or have you incarnated self-actualized? Do you have a stake in your life and what happens to you? Or are you like the souls with Mars in the 12th, until they can learn to harness their Mars energy, when they'll say, "I'll do it later, I don't like conflict." But without conflict, we have no ways to assert ourselves. We can't be liked by everyone all the time. Believe me, I've tried. This is the energy of Mars. All the best to you in your projects, and may you find the action you're seeking. To close, I just want to mention a favorite of mine, Adrienne Mary Brown. She says in her book, Emergent Strategy, at least consider that place where you might be wrong might be the most fertile ground for connection and receiving others. She reminds us to be soft in your rightness, as opposed to smashing people with your brilliance. Balance is key, listeners.
ready. I am always ready. I have been ready. I am ready.